If someone sends you a track to mix, do you get someone else to mix the vocals if it has them? I'm wondering what elements of a track you tend to widen. Anyway, I'm not going to get myself angry. What's the role of the artist in 2019? Hey guys, welcome to the Kane audio vlog. It's Friday, it's time for another Ask Me Anything. Usual rules apply. Comment anything you want below this video and I'll get back to you in next week's video answering your question. Before I move on to last week's video, is there any house admin? I don't think there is this week. Let me double check. No. I've written the words "set me free" here for some reason. What's that mean? I've got res out now, set me free. I've no idea. Okay, well, there we go. Oh, on that note, the Spotify playlist has been updated again. I think I mentioned this last week that I get confused what week it is because it's a Friday that I do these videos. It may or may not have already been updated last week, but if not, it's definitely updated this week. And I think that is about it. I have now booked my flights for Amsterdam, the ADE, in October, so that's all going ahead. I have also upgraded those to get the extra baggage, to get my cameras and microphones and lighting and whatever. Hopefully, I haven't actually weighed it yet, so we'll find out soon enough. Other than that, I think that is it for this week. There's not too many questions this week, so I don't think it's going to be too long, although I think I said that last week and it was still an hour. Right, let's go. Sunset 86. Interestingly, or not interestingly, stupidly, I keep saying I don't know how long this will be, but of course by the time you guys get to watching this video or listening to this podcast, you already know how long it is, so I don't know why I keep saying that. Never mind. Sunset 86. Hey Dom, congratulations on becoming a father. Thank you very much. I haven't commented for a while as I've been working flat out over the summer, but I still tune in without fail on Friday as I enjoy these AMA series. Thank you. If you're interested, Behringer, or Behringer, I never know, have actually released some of its analogue clones, including the ARP Odyssey, and even an MS-20 clone. Didn't they already do an MS-20? Didn't they do... oh no, it wasn't Behringer, was it? It was actually Korg who did the MS-20i, or the IMS-20, whatever it was. My only question this week relates to what you said in the video previous about vocal mixing. If someone sends you a track to mix, do you get someone else to mix the vocals if it has them? I noticed a while ago there was a different fee on your website for vocal mixing. Just wondering what your process is. Hope you have a good weekend. Thanks. So, vocal mixing. I have probably not been clear on this, to be honest. It's because it's kind of a bit of a judgment call. So on my website, I probably need to be more clear on that as well. I stipulate, I think it's an extra, I can't remember, I think it was 75, I could be wrong, for vocal stem mixing. And by that I mean, if your track, if you hire me to give your track a mix down, and you have a vocal on the track, that's not a problem. That's all just part of the standard package. However, if you have, and maybe I should stipulate a number of stems or something, because some people, particularly in singer-songwriter music and pop, if we're talking proper pop music, I mean, take Britney Spears for example. What was that track? I remember talking to an engineer who had, I think he'd worked on the track, and I forget which track it was, fairly, well, I say recent, this decade, and he'd said that they had something like 70 vocal stems of in the chorus. There were 70 layers of her voice going on, something like that. It was an astronomical amount of layers. So for something like that, I know my own limitations, and for me, because I don't spend all day every day working with vocalists and layering in harmonies and getting those, well, for lack of a better word, velocities and the volumes, the gains, the levels, whatever you want to call them, exactly right. You know, if you're dealing with, say, 10, 15 layers of vocal, it can get quite tricky, especially if each one is a different note within a chord, because clearly you have your lead vocal and you might have that doubled and then panned left and right, but then you might double the doubles, so then you've got quadruple lead vocals just to overpower the harmonies that then might be doubled as well. So you might have, if you've got, say, 3 notes in a chord, a basic triad of vocals, you may end up with 2, 4, 6, 8 stems just for that 3 notes. So it can get quite confusing sometimes when you're mixing vocals. So it's those sorts of jobs where I tend to add a little extra. So there are some that I will do myself, even when they're just a few stems. There are some that I will do myself because I know what I'm doing. I'm comfortable. I know what a good vocal sounds like. That's not too much of an issue. But it will take more time than a normal mixdown, because all of my, or I say all, 90% of mixdowns I do don't have a vocal. So for me, mixing instrumentals, I know exactly where everything sits and where it stands and what it does and when. That to me comes very naturally. When it comes to vocals, it's only probably less than 10% of my job. So because of the confidence issues, it will take a bit longer, so I put an extra charge on top of that. And the other reason for that is because if you're, like I say, sending me a track that has 50 layers of vocals, then I have friends who are much better than I am at mixing those vocals, so I would rather pass that extra money on to them and say, can you just mix this vocal and send me the mixed stem, and I'll then put it into the track. So it then becomes a 2-man job, basically. So that's why the additional fee is there. Hopefully that answers your question. So if someone sends you a track to mix, do you get someone else to mix the vocals if it has them? So kind of yes and no. Generally, no, I don't, because the vast majority of vocals that get sent to me are probably 1 stem, maybe 2 or 3 at the most. I'm fine with doing that. It's not a problem. You've got your lead vocal, your backing vocal, and maybe, a chorus gang vocal or something like that. That's not a problem. It's when people have huge harmonies and huge layers and very intricate vocals, that's when I start to go, that's outside of my remit, that's not my strong point. I'd rather get someone who really knows what they're doing and get the job done properly. So I think that's probably leading to good advice for any of you, and I'm going to assume all of you watching this are music producers to some level. Know your limits. If there is a job you're not good at, or a job that you don't feel confident at, there is nothing wrong with getting someone else to do it, getting a professional to do it. Whether that be your mixdown, your mastering, or vocal treatments, or recording, or whatever. So yeah, there we go. Hope you have a good weekend. Thanks. YouTube. Ricky John, UFC, high five. Man, this has been a couple weeks of long AMAs. It has. Yeah, I think I hit my record, was it 2 weeks ago? That was like an hour and a half or something. But I've enjoyed hearing your thoughts / rants on some deep ... ish topics. The future is certainly scary to think about right now, though a lot of that comes from uncertainty, I think, as with most things anxiety inducing. Yes, you're absolutely right. It is quite scary, but at the same time, I always say to people that talk about there being dark times and whatever, when it comes to things like oppression, racism, corruption, dictatorships, all of these things that happen in and around us at the moment, you sometimes have to just step back a little bit and zoom out on your timeline and go, actually, would I rather be born when I was born, or would I rather be born 20, 30, 40, 50 years previously? Because actually the world was a lot worse back then. And no matter how far back you go, the world has progressed in a more positive way. You know, for example, I know when I was a child in the 80s, you would quite regularly hear someone walking down the street openly saying something racist or homophobic or something along those lines, and it wasn't even, I mean, I want to say it wasn't frowned upon. It was frowned upon, but it wasn't a big deal. Whereas now, I like to think that if two people were walking down the street, a busy street, and openly saying something racist or homophobic, I like to think that someone nearby would hear it and go, whoa, hang on a second, you know, and step in on that. So I think the world is a better place, but we have peaks and troughs, and I think at the moment we're kind of just in a bit of a trough. So in terms of anxiety inducing, I don't want to be sort of scaremongering or whatever, even though this week has been a crazy week for politics, but I won't get into that. No questions this week, so thanks, have a great weekend. You too. Unknown artist. Hi mate, UFC, high five. Question this week is about stereo imaging. Correct me if the term I used was shit. Okay, that's okay so far. I'm wondering what elements of a track you tend to widen and which elements you like to keep straight down the middle. I'm guessing this will vary, but are there certain elements that you find yourself widening often in most of your tracks? Read more. Keep up the good work, bud. Cheers. Okay, stereo imaging, correct term. It's actually something that some people pay particular attention to, understandably, and I don't. I don't. That's not to say I ignore stereo imaging, but it actually, in the writing and production stage, I don't think I even consider stereo image really. So, but I'll also add to that, almost contradicting myself, maybe the reason I don't think of it is because there are some things that I do naturally without thinking that actually change the stereo image anyway. So let me try and explain that. What do I do? So in terms of frequency over stereo image, the general rule of thumb, very loose rule, but generally the rule of thumb is the lower the frequency, the more mono something needs to be. If it's essentially below, say, 100 hertz, so we're dealing bass and sub-bass, then you really want those frequencies to be mono. I know I've sort of touched on this before, but I'll say it again, that the traditional reason for this was because your music will traditionally end up on a TV, a kitchen radio, or a nightclub sound system. Those three things traditionally were always just mono. So if you had a stereo kick drum, let's say, then it can cause all sorts of phase issues, and you wouldn't know that until you put it on a mono system and you go, ooh, what the hell's happened to this kick drum, or bass line, or whatever it is. The other reason is because the reason for it being the lower frequencies is because they are bigger physical waveforms, and because of that they're more likely to clash. I want to say slower. It's not slower in terms of the speed of sound is still, what is the speed of sound? Is it 320 meters per second at 20 degrees centigrade, something like that? so the physical properties haven't changed, but the size of the waveform, so the curvature of the waveform is moving through a slower period. I think you know what I mean. The point being is that with a big standing wave, you've got more chance of it clashing with another big wave and it having a much bigger impact. Whereas with something really high frequency like a hi-hat that's going at 16th notes or whatever, they're so interspersed, and you know, if you were to have them crossing each other cross phase, the impact would be so small that you'd be unlikely to hear it. Unlikely, but not impossible. So yeah, so that's why you tend to sort of focus your lower frequency signals to be mono, your higher frequency signals, they can be mono or stereo, doesn't really matter. So there are things that I do, and this is where I kind of almost contradict myself. Because of that, I don't pay much attention, because for me, if a bass line is really stereo, I'm not bothered at the production stage or the sound design stage. It may just feel weird, so I might just mono it anyway because it's weird, but I'm not hugely bothered. It's only in the mixdown stage where I'm focusing on those details, where I'm, you know, I might low pass filter the whole track and go, right, what's mono, what's stereo, what sounds weird, what's clashing, whatever, you know. That's when I'm really thinking about those things. So, but to now start contradicting myself a little bit, there are things that I do within a track. So let's say, for example, I've got some hi-hats in 16th notes, which, as you all know if you listen to any of my music, 99% of it has hi-hats in 16th notes. You'll also notice that those hi-hats in 16th notes tend to flicker between left and right in the stereo field. I use a rotator for that, and I purposefully have the rotator off sync, so it's not on beat, it's not matched, it's I'll change the speed of the rotator in hertz to something that feels good, and I really pay no attention to it being synchronized with the rhythm of the track or anything like that. Again, because you're dealing with 16th notes, you're dealing with high frequencies, you're dealing with things that can splatter each other, and it kind of doesn't matter. It kind of just makes things a bit more loose and a bit more human. So yeah, so there are things like that I do. Then there are things like the fact that I use the Moog a lot. The Moog is mono. It has one cable coming out of it, the audio cable. So I will quite often, if I have a mono signal that is not necessarily bassline, it's a lead synth or a stab or whatever, something along those lines, or maybe the, you know, paraphonic chords or whatever, then I'll usually drop a bit of reverb on there, and that reverb will kind of, because reverb is simulating a room where sounds will bounce off walls, they will bounce off left and right, and that gives you that sort of stereo feeling. So if your sound is mono and you drop on reverb and it's a stereo reverb, then it will create the effect of it becoming more stereo-ish. So that's really all I do, but I do that because I think reverb on a mono synth like a Moog just sounds nice anyway. I will do the rotator on the hi-hats because I like it, not because I want it to do anything to the stereo field. It does something to the stereo field, but that's not the reason I'm doing it. So I guess that kind of answers, because you're wondering what elements of a track do you tend to widen. I guess maybe hi-hats, I guess maybe some mid-synths sometimes, but I don't use a stereo enhancer to do that. It will be through other trickery like reverb or rotation or a phaser or a chorus or whatever else there is out there. I know Bitwig has things like blur built in. Blur I love. It's like a really subtle kind of reverb, kind of phaser, kind of chorus, but kind of none of the above, and it just blurs the sound a little bit. Love that, because on something like a hi-hat or a nice sizzly sound, yeah, you just drop blur on it and it just does, it's really subtle, but I love it. That's in most of my tracks. So yeah, so it does vary, but those are the things I tend to do. In terms of proper stereo enhancement, I don't bother. I use, in the mix down stage, I use Brainworks Digital V2, I think it's called, which is a mid-side equalizer that allows you to make signals below the frequency of your choice. I tend to go with about 150 hertz into mono, called the Mono Maker. Equally, you have a stereo widener. I tend to have my when I'm happy with the track, I'll then maybe open it up to say 110%, so it's just an extra 10% stereo wider. Yeah, that's about it really. I don't tend to think about it too much, but I will say that I might be different to other people. I know there are some people out there who really put importance on stereo width. I never have traditionally. I just kind of do those things that tend to help anyway. So I don't think about it too much, and also I don't want something to really sound shit when it's on a mono system. Not that we have many mono systems anymore. I guess your mobile phone is one. Even those are becoming stereo these days. So yeah, there we go. Zombo. I'm just checking the time on the camera. We're good for another question. Question not related to music. Why are your thumbnails losing colour over time? It's just something I noticed. Also, 69 AMA, lol. Don't judge me, I have the brain of a 9-year-old. I did think about that last week, yeah, so you're not on your own there. Yeah, so thumbnails, I started with colour and a font that I really wasn't too happy with, and then I've slowly sort of desaturated thumbnails over time, because actually I hate the fact that this is true, but it is apparently true. Thumbnails are what makes people click on videos on YouTube and whatever. So I kind of figured that everybody goes for these big, bold, wow, and OMG, and all of this shit. And they're all super colourful and whatever. And that's not me. I'm not that kind of person. I hope I'm not a clickbait person. And I hope I never become a clickbait person. So I kind of went the opposite route, thinking, well, actually, because everybody's going with that route of super colourful thumbnails, I thought I'd desaturate mine. So yeah, so there we go. You may also notice that actually I think these videos have got slightly darker over time as well. It's just, yeah, one of those things. I'm just finding my comfortable level of videos looking clinical while also comfortable. So yeah, there we go. Well spotted. FanFan87, UFC, high five, salute Dom. I don't want to go too much into politics, but haha. You talked about it just a few minutes, but I 100% agree with you on the points you mentioned. I'm really scared if we can talk seriously about the present and our future. The incoming second big financial crisis, global warming, the collapse of our systems, the energy crisis, awesome teacher of Jean-Marc Jankovici, on the subject at l'École des Mines, 8 courses of 2.5 hours. My girlfriend and I want a child in a medium future, but as you said, what will be the world he will grow? All these bad things coming in the next decades really makes me desperate, and I wonder something, which is my question this week. So before I even look at your actual question, please rewind this video back to where I said that would you rather be born today, or would you rather have been born 50 years ago, where racism and right-wing bigotry and God knows what else was just rife. It was everywhere, you know, where half the world, I mean, 50 years ago, being gay was illegal in, I say half the world, I don't know if it was half, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was. You know, these absurd laws that only affect one group of people, and that one group of people and their life, I'm not even going to say choices because it's not a choice. I didn't choose to be straight or whatever. But it has zero impact on my life. So why the fuck would it be illegal? Who knows? Anyway, I'm not going to get myself angry. So yeah, so like I say, just remember that the world is progressively getting better. And the fact that we bring up, you know, there's always going to be an overshoot. And for any of you watching this video who are conservative or right-wing or right-leaning, whatever, you know, I also fully understand there are some issues on the left, and reality is naturally left-leaning, but I will also concede that there are issues on the left as well. For example, you know, things like the overshoot of things where we try to be overtly politically correct, and you know, the common sense rule would be don't be a dickhead, but actually people's definitions of dickhead is different in different places for different people. So I get it. Anyway, so that leads you on to your question this week. What's the role of the artist in 2019? What can he do in this context? Does he have to be a whistleblower? I love touchy questions, sorry. Okay, good question. And I'm going to reset the camera right now to answer that question because it's coming up to 30 minutes. So, what's the role of the artist in 2019? So I think that's a tricky one, because from my perspective, and I know that my perspective is different to probably most in the music industry, from my perspective, well, actually, let's go with other people's perspective. The job of an artist is just to entertain. I think that's it, and probably make lots of money. I become celebrity, famous, whatever. I don't know. From my perspective, though, I think the role of an artist in 2019 is possibly more important than it has ever been. Maybe. Certainly more important than it's been in the last 30 years, because, I mean, look at some of the greatest artists that ever lived. You know, look at the Beatles and how political they were and how political their music was. And I'm not a fan of the Beatles, but I'm very aware of their importance. I am a fan of Pink Floyd. Look how political theirs was. You know, look at The Wall. And these things last for generations. So I think it's hugely important that as artists we consider these things and we express our feelings about the world around us. So these things are, whether you watch the news or not, is irrelevant. The world will influence your music. So I think it's hugely important that we express it as best as we can. I don't think that any one artist should take the weight of the world on their shoulders, but I do think we just need to at least consider these things. And whether your consideration is, I want people to go to a nightclub on a Saturday night and listen to banging techno for 6 hours straight and just forget about their troubles, that's one view. So I'm not saying you have to make political music, but I'm saying that we need to consider our environment. I guess for me, my music has changed a lot over the last few years, and I think it's quite representative of my views of the world and just my ways of thinking and dealing with these things. So yeah, what can you do in this context? It's tricky. I think there are two roads you can go down. You can either form a political viewpoint, or you can form a non-political viewpoint that is technically political, because your politics is I don't like politics. So it's a tricky one. Does he have to be a whistleblower? I'm not sure what you mean in that respect. Whistleblower of whom and about what? I'm not sure. But I think technically we as humans need to be whistleblowers. If we see some shit going down that we don't think is right, we should say something, you know. I know there's this whole image of snitches get stitches and all of that, but that's just not right, is it? You know, because actually if we all followed our rules that we create, then maybe things wouldn't be so fucked up. Who knows? Hopefully that kind of answers your questions. So Nicholas, hi Dom, thanks for answering my question. The price for the display was going to be spending £300. Thanks for your link. Okay, so this is the computer you were building. And if I remember rightly, the total cost was £2,700. So your £300 monitor takes you down to £2,400, which is not crazy for a good spec PC. However, I would say have a look at that link. Let me know what you think of the parts on that link as well. So I think so the link I gave was to the Ryzen PC that I put together, which was the Ryzen 5 2600. So it's 6-core, 3.4 gigahertz, something like that. So a good solid CPU, an AMD Sapphire RX 580 graphics card, so it's like 8 gig of graphics or whatever, 16 gig of Corsair Vengeance RAM. So it's a pretty solid machine. In my view, maybe 32 gig of RAM would be better, but 16 is still more than enough to get started. I know that you mentioned that your computer was really only used for music stuff and then browsing the web, so you know, you don't need to go overboard. You're not exporting huge videos or whatever, so maybe, you know, the graphics card, maybe go for a 570 instead of a 580, because you don't need that extra bit. I don't know what the price difference is. I think the 580 would save you a fair bit of money, but yeah, I mean that's your basic setup, and I think that was like £600 or something all in. So you know, you could literally build 3 of those for the price that you said. The reason yours was so expensive, I think, or one of the reasons, without seeing the actual spec, but you went for Intel Core, was it i9 CPU? And like I said, I think I said last week anyway, you know, if you look at some of the iMacs, for example, they're still on Core i5, and they're powerful machines, so you probably don't need Core i9. I get that you're future-proofing, but you probably don't need an i9. So there's that. Yeah, and I seem to remember you mentioned Mac versus PC, and if you're going for just straight Windows PC, then you really don't need to spend huge amounts of money. You know, like I say, that Ryzen 5 build that I did was really easy to put together and pretty damn cheap for what you got. So yeah, give it a go. Raphael, UFC, high five. And you've linked a part where I obviously waffled, and you said, what a cool story, Dom. Thanks for sharing. It is something really important to keep in mind. It's hard being present in the moment when you're in hard work mode. Micro steps, it really is the answer for almost every goal in life, right? Absolutely. Especially if you probably have attention deficit disorder, that I believe is my case. Beyond the fact that it is unheard in mankind to be exposed to so much information and distraction daily. You got that right. So, if someone random is reading this and you're having problems getting stuff done, turn off the internet and eradicate all potential distractions, which I think is easier said than done. So, quick question. I don't want to be annoying revisiting that topic, but doing remixes / bootlegs, it would be one of the hidden tricks to reach the pro level faster. Okay, so let me finish reading your thing first. Since you're forced to match your elements to an already pro and finished track, It was very few times I've tried this, and I really wonder if I missed or skipped something really important in the journey of becoming a pro as a producer. So there are some people, there was definitely a period probably 10 years ago where everybody just seemed to be doing bootlegs of everything, and some of those people were having their bootlegs supported by huge DJs, because at the end of the day, you know, let's be honest, if you go to a nightclub, you're having a great time, everyone's happy, and the DJ drops a classic, then of course the crowd goes wild, you know, of course it is. So it makes sense that a bootleg gets attention because of that. I certainly drop a fair amount of bootlegs in especially festival season. I'll usually drop at least 1 or 2 bootlegs in every set, because it's a festival and people aren't there to see just me, they're there to see loads of artists. So I have to provide a more, I'll say, generic kind of set to an extent. So based on that, some people have gathered more attention because of their bootlegs, but it doesn't mean that they're a better producer, and they're not missing, by not doing it, you're definitely not missing anything. There are also now a lot of producer DJs out there who are just bored of getting bootlegs over and over again. So, and also because there was a big phase where everybody did bootlegs, it kind of got to a point where, you know, you had 15 versions of whatever classic song there was, you know, and I think everybody's kind of done everything now. So it's I think that's going to wear out, so I think it'll be a bit less popular. So there's that to bear in mind. I really wouldn't worry about it, because you're definitely not missing anything. And also, I feel like in terms of learning, I don't think it's helpful to do a bootleg necessarily. And in terms of just straight remixes of whether it be friends or other artists or whatever, they're always a good idea to do, because they help you learn a bit better, because you can see how other people have approached a certain sound, or you can see what you're capable of in manipulating someone else's sound. So I think that one's a good route to go down. And also, if it's a proper legitimate remix, then you don't have hundreds of other people to compete with doing the exact same thing over and over again. So I think you don't mean legit remixes, though. I think you mean bootlegs, which is entirely different, and I've kind of answered that. So in terms of journey of becoming a pro as a producer, I wouldn't bother with bootlegs. I mean, so for me personally, I always say I don't bother with bootlegs, but I always have a couple up my sleeve. But the only reason I ever do a bootleg is for fun, because I might hear a track on the radio and go, oh, that was a classic, no one's done a bootleg of that, I'll do one for my own sets. Or I'll know that people have done bootlegs, but it just doesn't fit my set. So for me, a bootleg is just a personal thing for my gigs, for my crowds, for me to use, and that's about it. You know, I did one of Mori Kante Yeke Yeke, which is on my SoundCloud. I've given that to a few big DJs who have played it for the last couple of years. But when I say few, I mean literally 10 DJs have it, I think, at the most. And I prefer it that way, because I know that if, for example, Dave Seaman plays it tonight somewhere around the world, the chances of it being played anywhere else that night in the world are so slim. So I know that he's got it kind of exclusively, really. So yeah, I think that answers your question, hopefully. There we go. Francesco Di Carlo, number 100, cheers, high five. Valentin B. I have just a computer to $300 and free software, and I have created a lot of song on my channel. I don't know anything about music. Thanks for the video. Not easy to understand you for a French like me, but anyway, nice video. Thank you very much. Yeah, so there we go. I mean, that says a lot. So he's made a computer for $300 and using free software and is able to make music. So I think that also helps what I was just saying about the PC build. And finally, Rod Marconi, UFC, high five. And on that note of UFC, it is Khabib's big fight tomorrow with Dustin Poirier. So I am definitely looking forward to that. Right. It has been not too bad today. What are we looking at? About 45 minutes, probably a bit less than. Thank you very much for listening. If you've made it this far into the video, I'm going to give you a keyword to mention. Do you know what? I'm going to say the word summer, because it says here Deadmau5 Summer Chill Mix. It's definitely not summer anymore. It is now September and today looks miserable outside. This room probably looks darker than usual because behind the camera there is a big square window, and even though I have the blinds closed, the light comes through from the sun most mornings, and it is morning and there is no sun. So yeah, there we go. Yeah, comment the word summer and I'll give you a high five next week. As always, please do get involved. I do like these questions coming in, and as you can see, they're anything from PCs to politics to sound design to mixdowns. It's up to you. You control the content of these videos every Friday. So I will see you this time next week. Have a good weekend. Cheers.